Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of distillationsbl. And today I'm going to be continuing watching and reacting. The way I've labeled it is engaging with John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And we are on to episode 2, which is Flow, Metaphor, and the Axial Revolution. Very excited, and I think we should just jump right in. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
I want to continue now in talking more about that, more about what's going on in shamanism in order to get more explication of this meaning-making, wisdom, altered states of consciousness, different kinds of knowing, and how they're all interrelated together. So typically the shaman engages in practices that are putting significant changes in their attention. As we mentioned, there's often significant disruptive strategies: sleep deprivation, sex deprivation, social isolation, the use of psychedelics, extended chanting, all of these, dancing, all of these things are designed to bring about radical changes in the way in which the brain is operating.
So one thing that strikes me there is that it reminds me when I was in active addiction and my drug of choice was something that kept me awake for multiple days at a time, and sleep deprivation was its own sort of high in a way. Sometimes I would think that I was enjoying just feeling this sort of drunkenness without having to get drunk. It was this kind of loopy detachment from reality, kind of walking through a waking dream. It was some ethereal floating through reality sort of feeling. And that was just purely based on lack of sleep. I'm sure also coming down from the uppers, but it was definitely its own kind of thing. So that's interesting to think that that was a deliberate technique used by shamans to enter into an altered state of consciousness for probably a beneficial reason or outcome, rather than trying to escape reality or escape confronting reality clean, versus altering it for the value of the tribe or for the purpose of some kind of communal benefit for the tribe.
Now, part of what a shaman is doing is, I would argue, also getting into the flow state. So the flow experience is an experience people get into. They often describe it as like being in the zone. So you are involved in a task that is very demanding. In fact, it has a particular structure to it. So these are your skills, and these is how demanding the situation is, right? And the flow state is one in which the demands of the situation just slightly go beyond your skill abilities.
This is a cool way of visualizing the flow channel. I think I was introduced to flow by a different guy. I want to say Stephen Kotler. That was part of my fascination with these sort of tech gurus, early internet theorists, and I stumbled upon his work. Okay, so challenges, high challenging, low challenging, anxiety. So the higher the challenge, the more your anxiety goes up. That makes sense. And then the other axis is skills. So low skill, low challenge, not much anxiety. High skill, low challenge is boredom. Okay, so boredom goes up when it's low challenge, but high skill. And then if it's high challenge, high skill, the anxiety's going up and the boredom's going up. But if you're in that sweet spot, then you're in the flow state.
one of the things we've created in our culture, if we have created flow induction machines. Because what those machines have are a situation where your skills are constantly improving and the demands of the environment are constantly improving. And these flow induction machines have other properties that are very important in them. There's a very tight feedback between what you do and how the environment responds. You're getting very clear information, and failure matters. It's like, at least symbolically, because you can die. And of course, some of you are probably realizing that I'm talking about video games. Video games are one of the most reliable ways of inducing the flow state in people. In fact, part of the reasons why video games are addictive, and they now are being considered to be a bona fide addiction by the World Health Organization.
It's very much part of my addiction was video games. I was chasing that flow state.
Is precisely because they engender the flow state. Addictions, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about addictions, addictions run off machinery that is evolutionarily adaptive. That's why it's compelling. And the flow state is deeply, deeply positive for people. It's not the same thing as physical pleasure, right? In fact, the flow state is much more connected to meaning in life. In fact, the more often you get into the flow state, the more likely you will rate your life as meaningful. The more you will experience well-being.
Yeah, okay, so I definitely want him to, or I'll have to see what he says when he talks about the addiction part, because if your addiction is drawing you towards these flow manufactured environments like video games, but you're addicted to the video game and addicted to the substance, and those are coupled together, then I don't think I would have rated my life as very meaningful when I was in that state. When I was caught in those cycles, I don't think I would have said it was very meaningful. I think I was using the flow state as a way of getting out of my own head. And the thing that was great about video games and other things is that it took all of me, all of my attention, all of my phenomenal consciousness and awareness was completely enveloped, completely taken by the activity at hand. And now learning that it was because of this kind of skill, challenge, anxiety, boredom ratio that had me so into the world of the video game, but it was an escape. It was the best way of not having a self-awareness script running at all times. And then as soon as I was so exhausted and done with the drug or done with the playing of the video game or the activity that had me so encapsulated, that's when trying to fall asleep after not sleeping and after being spent and drained in a shell and all of those things, that's then all of a sudden all of the self-awareness script starts running nonstop, and then you can't sleep, and then it's, and then you take more the next day to get yourself right again, and that hell.
So when people are in the flow state, right, their a kind of self-consciousness disappears. That self-conscious, we carry around that self-consciousness that's always doing this sort of thing. It's constantly sort of doing our autobiography. How's my day going? How am I doing? Who am I? What am I doing? Blah, blah. And it's also checking. How do I, image management? How do I look? What are people thinking of me? How am I doing? Am I under threat? All of that nattering and, am I failing? I knew, and that, of course, and that can get out of hand. And like when you're in depression, you ruminate on all that stuff and it overwhelms you. But we all carry that burden around. It's taxing. And the thing in the flow state, it's gone.
Yeah. That's what was so intoxicating about getting into that flow state. And my drug of choice was Adderall. And it, it also amped up, among other things, but my main drug of choice was Adderall. And that was supposed to be treating my ADD, my ADHD. And yet I was using it for other things. I was using it because it allowed me to so get into this maniacal focus on the activity that I was choosing to engage with. Maybe not engage. I shouldn't use it in that sense. Anyway, everything would I'd be in it, and all the things that he was just mentioning would I would have a reprieve from that inner monologue and self-awareness script.
Because there's no space for all of that, because you're so, right, engrossed in the task. The other thing about the flow state is it's super salient. It's like the kind of brightness and vividness you get in a video game. The world seems more intense. And people really like this experience. And not only do they like it, it seems to be where they do their best work. So the flow experience is an optimal experience in two ways. Many people regard it as the best experiences they can have, but it's also where they're doing their very best at what they want to excel in.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've just never experienced a healthy flow state, or a flow state in regards to something that I would be proud of. I mean, playing sports and high school and college and that sort of thing, like, I could totally see flow states happening there during a game. And I think, to the extent of the work that I do with my stuff on Instagram and reading and putting together quotes for people and that sort of thing, and some of these videos, I mean, this one is more maybe a reaction type video. I think I'm attempting to get into some kind of flow state, but there's other videos I've done where I'm reading very difficult, books on metaphysics and struggling through. And I think the process of reading it and then speaking out loud my struggles with the ideas in there and attempting to learn this stuff with you guys, I think there's an aspect of flow there, and that's what I'm aiming for. So that's the positive. I don't know if I do it enough. I'm trying to get into these positive flow states more, and now being clean, for over a year and a half, I'm working towards that, increasing the time I spend in those positive flow states. But yeah, when I think back, just the vast majority of flow states I was in, there was no pride, there was no sort of, maybe a little bit with the video games, winning games and in there. But
do you see what's going on with the rock climber, the jazz musician, the martial artist, is this idea of a cascade of insights. You're having an insight that's leading to another insight, that's leading to another insight, right? It's priming. So, when you have like an insight, you have like, aha!
Yeah.
And you get that sort of burst
Yeah.
of energy, and it's like a flash. That's why we put a light bulb over somebody's head when we want to show them having an insight. It's like that flash.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably why I got so obsessed with philosophy so quickly, was because I went from knowing absolutely zero about how the world worked, and even popular science books and all of this kind of stuff, not really being super interested in getting to the bottom of things. And then there was some kind of unlock with philosophy and realizing it was connected to science, so that both of these subjects were telling me about the world, and just for the first time learning about quantum mechanics and the nature of the quantum world. And then that being like such a radical insight of, oh my God, this is accepted science, and there's all these different interpretations that are deeply philosophical and have to do with our ontology and our epistemology and probabilistic metaphysical nature of that. It was just so many, it just kept on opening to me new fields, new subjects, new things to explore. Maybe even a bit too quickly, where I got very overwhelmed and maybe retreated back into this active addiction and losing my flow state in something that wasn't connected to reality. A video game just keeps you in this other world because cascading insights about the nature of the real world was as frightening and terrifying as it was invigorating and awe-inspiring. There was something that the stakes were so much higher when it came to learning about the nature of the actual world we live in, and something so much more low stakes and safe about losing yourself in the world of video games or other fantasy worlds, rewatching the same movie series that you love over and over and over again, rereading the same fantasy books. I would reread Harry Potter over and over and over again and just lose myself in these more safe worlds where the insights weren't as prevalent, but there was also some kind of motivation, reward, feedback loop that was so intoxicating. That flow state, unhealthy flow state.
Gosh. Now imagine if I took that aha and I extended it. Aha. That's the flow state. It's an insight cascade. So the more you flow, the more you're training your ability for insight and interacting with your environment. Now the trouble, of course, with the video game is the environment isn't a real world.
Right.
But in the shaman's world, of course, the shaman's flowing in the real world, the real social world, the real ecological world.
Mm.
But there's something more. It's not just an insight cascade that's going on in flow. That in and of itself would be great. But there's something else going. And this has to do with your capacity for implicit learning. Now notice what's happening here. Notice that although even I'm doing the history, I'm always also doing the cog sci. Because while I'll be emphasizing the history, the historical account, I'm starting to build what I need to give you the structural functional account.
Structural functional is something I was investigating for the last video. So the cognitive science account, he's saying, is the structural functional account.
Okay, so implicit learning.
Yeah, what's this?
This goes back to
Cognitive
work done in the 60s by Arthur Reber and a whole bunch of other people. So what Reber was doing is he was originally trying to understand how people learn language. What he was doing was he was generating an arbitrary set of rules, completely arbitrary, just make them up on the spot, set of rules for how you can link strings of letters and or numbers together. Like the rule might be you can't have more than 3 vowels in a row, or you have to have 2 consonants, and then you generate letter strings. 8, 9 long. These are so long that you can't sort of easily hold them in your working memory. And then this is what you do. You can generate an indefinite number. You generate a huge number of these strings, and you just show them to people. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. Okay, that's the first part of the experiment. Then you do the second part of the experiment. Now you generate a whole bunch of strings, but 2 kinds. One set of strings is generated by that artificial set of rules, and so follows the same rules as the first set. And then the second set is generated by a completely different set of rules.
Okay.
Okay? And what you do is you mix up the first and the second together. And this is the task you give people. Can you tell me the strings that belong with the strings you saw before?
Okay. They're mixed
There you
up.
go.
And then you have
Now,
to...
Reber originally thought what would happen is people would, because it seems like so random. What he found was
the people would not be able to do it and would give up?
score well above chance consistently on this. People can tell you, oh no, those strings, yeah, those belong with the old ones. No, that one doesn't. That one does, that one doesn't. Now here's what's interesting. You now ask people, why? How do you know that? And they'll give you one of 2 answers. They'll say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just feel it. Mm. Which is, woo. Mm-hmm. Or they say, they give you some explanation. They'll give you some rule or procedure they're using, and here's what we know. They're deceiving themselves or lying to you because that rule that they're using wouldn't actually predict their success.
Okay, deceiving themselves, doing their best job at guessing, speculating as to, their problem solving. They're trying to come up with the rule set that matches the rule set that they thought that they were picking up on. Is it deceiving, or is it early in the process of theorizing or solving the problem of generating the accurate rule set that was the pattern that they were picking up on? So deception, I feel like, has maybe a slightly different quality than early in the process of trying to reverse engineer the thing that you were picking up on. But it could just be straight deception, self deception, appeasing the person you're trying to talk to. I don't know.
Let me talk about an experiment that's really interesting. So there was some work done on this idea, that people have psychic abilities, and there's the feeling of being stared at. People can tell when they're being stared at. And people reliably report that they think, oh, I knew somebody was staring at me. I could just feel it in the back of my neck and stuff like that. And so they ran an experiment in which they did the following. They'd have somebody in a room, blindfolded, earplugged. They can't sense anything. Nobody's allowed to wear perfumes or anything. That person can't see or hear or feel, and they're just standing in the room. Unbeknownst to that person, people would come in and stare at them. And then they had to report if the person at the center of the room had to report if they were being stared at or not. And people were reporting this well above chance. They were saying, I think I'm being stared at. And there was somebody there. And of course, first of all, they was, ooh, right. But then it turned out that if you made a slight change to that experiment, it wouldn't replicate. So what was going on? You bring people into the room and they say, I think I'm being stared at. And the researchers would tell them if they were correct or not. They would say, you're right, or you're wrong. So what? You say, so what? Well, here's the thing. The researchers thought they were introducing people, the viewers, into the room randomly. But it turns out they weren't introducing them randomly, because you know what's very hard for you to do? Random stuff.
Yeah.
They were actually introducing people as viewers.
You need like one of those random number generators and set it up in a way, where the computer's taking care of the randomness so that it's mathematically actually random, I would say. I don't know if that's really possible, but I think you should be able to set that up, and then the computer maybe could tell you, bring someone in at this time, this time, this time, this time, this time. And that's more random than someone just thinking that they're the scientist or the person running the experiment thinking that they're doing it genuinely randomly when it's probably not.
In a complex pattern. And the person that was blindfolded and earplugged was implicitly learning the pattern because they were getting feedback.
Okay.
If you take the feedback away, if you don't tell them, whenever they say, I'm being stared at or not, if you don't tell them they're right or wrong, their performance drops to chance. See?
So it's the feedback. And you're picking up, because there's some kind of feedback from the environment, that in a similar way of the people being able to pick out the rule set strings of letters and numbers he was talking about before, in that same similar way when there was feedback. But was there feedback in that one where they were picking up on it because they knew whether or not they were right or wrong, and that was the difference maker, and that if you didn't tell them it was right or wrong, it would have gone to chance? I don't know if there's a complete analogy here, if these two experiments are totally analogous, and maybe they're not supposed to be, but they're both examples of implicit learning. So how much does the feedback factor mean to this implicit learning, this process of implicit learning? Because the first example seemed to be that there's an intuitive sense of a rule set, and we have this ability to pick up on that. rule set, but not necessarily feedback. It's just that we can't really articulate what the rule set was when asked afterwards. But then this second example is more that we can pick up on it and we can learn over time and get better at someone staring at me or not staring at me, because there is some sort of pattern that the experimenter is introducing into this situation. Okay, I'm picking up on the pattern. I can't really tell you what the rule set is that I'm following, but it's an implicit pattern I've picked up on. And because you're giving me feedback, it's getting better and better over time. So these seem slightly different. I want to know whether or not the feedback is the special variable here.
A lot of what looks like psychic abilities are your ability to pick up implicitly on complex patterns in the environment without being aware of it. So, Hogarth, in his book on educating intuition, made a really cool claim. Makes a very good argument, in fact, I think, for this. He says that what we call intuition is a real thing, but there isn't anything sort of magical about it, like the psychics say, or something like that. Your intuition is the result of your implicit learning. You pick up on all kinds of complex patterns, not knowing how you have done that. You get an ability to detect patterns, and you don't know how. That's why your intuition feels the way it does. You just sort of know. Like, you know things, you're doing it all the time. To use a famous example from Dreyfus, you know how far to stand from somebody.
No, Dreyfus.
And what angle to like where you should stand, how close you should stand, what angle you should stand, how, as the conversation or the context changes, you're allowed to move closer or farther away, what angles you're allowed to be at. But if I were to ask you to tell me how you do that, you wouldn't know. You would just say, I know how to do it. And yet, when people don't know how to do it, it creeps you out.
Yeah.
It creeps you out. Okay, so intuition. Now, Hogarth points out, and this is something very common, right? Hogarth points out that, we have two different terms and we don't realize we're talking about the same thing. We have intuition when we think it's going well, that implicit learning, but we also have bias and prejudice for when we think that implicit learning goes bad.
Okay.
The bigot has got intuitions about races that are wrong. Now, how is it that implicit learning goes wrong? Well, here's the thing. You have
There's two different ways of describing the same process. One, intuition for good outcomes or reliable outcomes, bias or prejudice when the outcomes are incorrect. So maybe even correct and incorrect. That's how we label the thing that should be maybe a neutral term, which is intuition, good intuition and bad intuition.
complex pattern in the environment, right? And your implicit learning picks up on it. The problem is there's two kinds of patterns in your environment. There's correlations, there's correlation patterns and causal patterns. So what do I mean by that? Correlations is when any two things are related to each other. I'm old enough, right? And I was brought up in a religious household that I was, when prayer was taken out of the schools. And of course, people were very upset about that. Look at crime is going up as we've taken prayer out of the schools and things like that. By the way, crime hasn't been going up. Read some of Steven Pinker's work. But let's say it was. That's only a correlation. Because here's another correlation. We know that greenhouse gases have been going up steadily. And that's part of the environmental crisis we're going to talk about. You know what has been also consistently going down for the exact same time period? Caribbean piracy. Having pirates in the Caribbean and wooden ships with cannons and stuff. As that went down, greenhouse gases went up.
Oh, okay.
Now, I hope none of you think that we could solve global warming by bringing back piracy.
Yeah.
Okay? So there are many things there are many patterns in the world that are illusory.
Is this what people say, like overdetermined or underdetermined in the philosophy of science? I feel like I've heard that, where there's just so many factors that, so many, whatever the word is, that could be the cause of a certain phenomenon, And if there's so many and we can't really tease apart which is which, and they're all contributing potentially to the same conclusion, then it's overdetermined. There's too many causing this one thing.
Because they're only correlational. They're not causal. See, the bigot has picked up on correlational patterns, not causal patterns. So what you want to do is you want to train your implicit learning.
So maybe overdetermined is treating them as all causes, but what he's talking about here is that correlations aren't causal at all. There's no causal power to them. So causal versus correlational. Correlational looks as if it could be causes and sort of tricks you into thinking that, oh, this could have causal power for this outcome or this conclusion, but it's not actually causal, it's correlational. Okay.
To pick up on the causal patterns that are real rather than the correlational patterns that are illusory. Now, here's what you can't do. You can't tell people to look for patterns explicitly. Go back to Reber's experiment. If you put people into that experiment where they're looking at the letter strings and you tell them explicitly what they're supposed to do, try and figure out the rules. Consciously, deliberately try to figure out the rules. Their performance doesn't get better. It gets worse. And Hogarth notes this in his book on educating intuition. We can't replace implicit learning with explicit learning because it is precisely by being implicit that it works so well.
Yeah.
What can we do explicitly then? What we can do is set up the right context, the right environmental factors, so that my implicit learning machine will tend more likely to get onto causal patterns rather than correlational patterns. So I'll get good intuition rather than bad intuition. How do you do that? Well, Hogarth says the way you would do this is the way you do science. You want to control the context, right? Because what science is, and there's a lot of science. Look, science is a way of distinguishing causal patterns from correlational patterns. You set up an environmental situation so that you can distinguish the causal patterns from the correlational patterns. Well, what do? Well, in an experiment, first of all, I make sure that everything is very clearly measured. I get very clear information.
Science is distinguishing between the causal patterns and the correlational patterns. That's a very simplified view. Science is picking up the causal from the correlational, distinguishing those. Yeah, okay, so I think for his purposes, this is one aspect of science, but to call that the essence of science or something that extreme, I don't think he would do, because that just seems like an oversimplified version of science. Just, with my vague familiarity with philosophy of science, there's all sorts of features of science that you can pick out as being the defining features, and that is quite a debate. There's a lot going on. There's a whole lot going on. Is it empiricism? Is it mathematical nature of science? Is it the social structure of science that makes it special or makes science science and pseudoscience pseudoscience? There's many different hypotheses for what makes science special. I'm open to hearing how this causal from correlational is distinctive to science in John Vervaeke's conception.
Very clear information. I make sure I'm looking to see that, right, that the change in one variable is closely followed by a change in another variable. So I change your drug dosage, do your symptoms get better? Right? So I look for clear information, I look for clear feedback, and in science, failure matters. You test a hypothesis, and disconfirmation has to be possible. Failure matters. Now notice this. What Hogarth says is, well, what I want to do is I want to put you into an implicit learning situation where you get clear feedback, like you do in science, where there is a tight coupling between what you do and how the environment responds, and where error really matters, like in science. And he says what we should do is we should try and do implicit learning in those kinds of contexts. Well, here's what myself and my colleagues argued. Those three criteria that will turn your intuition into good implicit learning are exactly the conditions for flow. Clear information, tightly coupled feedback, and error matters. So, notice what we've got going on here. The shaman is getting into the flow state, is developing all these techniques for getting into this deeply immersive, comprehensive flow state. And they're getting an insight cascade. Mm-hmm. And they're also getting enhanced implicit learning, picking up on very complex, real complex patterns. Now, this is intuitive. They don't know how they're doing it. Now, here's what's interesting, too. These two are reinforcing each other. Because the insight gets your cognition to explore for new patterns, and then the implicit learning picks up those new patterns. And then those new patterns enhance your ability to restructure. And then, right, you keep exploring for new patterns, acquiring the new patterns for implicit learning, and you keep ratcheting your skills up. Getting into the flow state is deeply, deeply enhancing of your cognition. Somebody who's an expert.
Okay, I think I'm following this process. How much does implicit learning matter here? Can it be explicit also? Or is there something about the flow state that is coupled to implicit rather than explicit? I may be getting lost in the setup here, because I think we were making the move that from implicit can't work as explicit. So how do we increase the efficacy of implicit learning? And then he made the analogy to science, and that if you create an environment where the context is set up such that implicit learning is encouraged by the very environmental factors you introduce, then you get an analogy to science, causal versus correlational. We're picking up on the real causal patterns, not the correlational patterns that are mistaken. And then, again, those environmental factors end up being analogous to flow. I hope I just summarized that correctly. And so now we have flow and encouraging implicit learning being synonymous. Okay. Flow, implicit learning being synonymous. But now if flow is enhanced implicit learning, that's just the process through which the enhanced implicit learning takes place and happens, then, a cascade of insights, aren't those just implicit learning happening? If there's a equivalence here, if these are just two names for the same process, is that the claim is that what's being put forth, is that they are deeply synonymous, or that they are complementary in a way, but they're distinct? Or are they literally the same thing with two different names? And then I guess I'm just curious, is this cascade of insights, how is that different than enhanced implicit learning? And why can't it be explicit? I'm just I'm engaging with this, because I don't think I'll grasp it unless I'm grappling with it. So I'm trying here. I could be totally misunderstanding all of this too. That's highly probable.
Getting into the flow state is going to be an individual you want to have around. Now, that individual is going to have some really serious challenges facing them. They don't know how they're getting a lot of the information they're getting. They don't know why they're so insightful. They're experiencing this radical at one-ment with the world, this loss of sense of self, when they're enacting the animal, right? You have to understand, these insights aren't verbal insights. Like in the 9-dot problem, it's not words, it's not beliefs. It's getting an insight in how the deer moves. It's getting an insight, an intuitive insight in how to talk to this person, to trigger the placebo effect, to help them to heal right now. So, getting into the flow state, notice what's going on here. Notice you're getting something that's almost like a mystical experience. It's a powerful altered state of consciousness. It's enhancing your cognitive processing. And the shaman is making meaning. They're singing, they're dancing, they're telling stories, they're altering people's sense of what matters, they're altering people's sense of identity, they're healing and transforming people. What does that mean? Why would that have powered the Upper Paleolithic transition?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, this is enhancing your cognition. And this goes towards the work of Michael Winkelmann and also Matt Rossano. What's happening in this state is your brain is learning to get areas to talk to each other that normally don't talk to each other. This is especially the case if you've gone through a massive disruption strategy, fasting, social isolation, taking psychedelics. Because if you look at a brain scan of somebody who's having a psychedelic experience, areas of the brain that normally do not talk to each other are talking to each other now. Now, if I was just to do that to you, if I was just to get areas to talk to each other, you'd experience that as noise. But if you've got enhanced insight and enhanced intuition, those areas are now talking to each other and you can bridge between them.
Enhanced insight, enhanced intuition. Insight and intuition. Okay, so I think that's where I was getting caught, is that I'm not exactly sure what the distinction is between insight and intuition. They do seem at face value to be very different phenomena, very different processes, whatever the term is. Always struggling to find the appropriate terms. It's like I only have so many terms available to me, and I don't have a whole etymology for each one like John Vervaeke does, so I'm spitballing stuff, and through this process, maybe I'll get a better handle on the terminology that I do attempt to use. Anyway, insight and intuition. Insight is that the 9-dot problem he was talking about, the breaking frame, and intuition is another name for implicit learning, which is picking up on a pattern, but you're not explicitly aware that the pattern is there, but you can point to it. So pattern recognition, hidden pattern recognition, intuition, and breaking frame, and an insight cascade of a bunch of those happening during the flow state, and the flow state being optimal environment for enhanced implicit learning. Oh, was that it? Was that it? Did I get it there? Okay. I need a whiteboard, honestly. I need a whiteboard to write this stuff down. Okay, I'm going to try to hold that in my head for as long as possible as he goes on here. See if I can solidify that in my working memory.
You can connect them. And now this is an ability you take for granted. You think it is just the normal part of your cognition. This is your capacity for metaphor.
Cool. I know he's written a bunch of papers on metaphor, so I'm interested to see him summarize what's going on in his papers on metaphor. Maybe I'll not react to a video, but maybe I'll read through some of his papers on metaphor and struggle through. You can join me in struggling through those papers and more engagement with Vervaeke's work.
The word metaphor is itself a metaphor. It means to bridge, to carry over, to connect things that are normally not connected.
That's cool.
And what you need to understand is how pervasive metaphor is. I showed you a little bit last time, the idea of a project.
Projectile.
But I want you to reflect now, and notice the word reflect is a metaphor, on how your thought and language is filled with metaphor. By the way, that was a metaphor. I'll say, for example, do you see what I'm saying? Do you get my point? Do you comprehend it? Can you grasp it? Do you understand it? These are all metaphors.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through this talk. I hope it's not too hard for you.
It might
You
be.
see?
I think it might be.
It's pervasive and profound. All of your cognition, this is work done by Lakoff and others. I have some criticisms of some of their theory, but the idea...
Oh, George Lakoff, I think I know him. Philosophy in the Flesh, I believe, is maybe another book by him. Metaphors We Live By. I might have to buy this.
that your cognition is
This is
filled
cool.
and functions through metaphorical enhancement. That's just, I think, the case. Now, why is metaphor so powerful? Because metaphor is how you make creative connections between ideas. Metaphorical cognition is at the heart of both science and art. When the shamans are enhancing this machinery, they're connecting areas of the brain that normally didn't talk to each other and affording a massive enhancement in metaphor.
So the connecting of brain regions in the brain being amplified by this shamanistic rituals of action and practice and behaviors, connecting, bridging these parts. So it's a metaphor itself. There's so many layers of metaphors. So not only are they connecting these parts of brain regions, but they're increasing your capacity for metaphorical thinking. And it's literally a metaphor of the bridging two different areas. That's a lot of metaphors. That's a lot of stacking of metaphors.
One of the ways in which your cognition and meaning and altered states of consciousness come together is in how your mind, your embodied mind, is generating metaphor in order to make insightful connections. There's a deep connection between how insightful, how good a problem solver you are, and your capacity for metaphorical thought. That's why when somebody is facing a problem and they need to restructure how they think about it, we tell them to use an analogy, to think of a metaphor. So, this is the point.
I think humor, too. I think comedians and just being funny is really much about connections, metaphorical thinking, making metaphors. Someone's using a word in one way and then flip it and use it in another way that isn't intended in that context, and then that breaks the frame.
The shaman is developing psychotechnologies for altering the state of consciousness to get into the flow state. And that flow state is already making them more insightful and more intuitively powerful, but it is also making them generators of metaphor.
Cool.
Literally providing people with the forms of thought that will allow them to connect ideas, such that making inscriptions on a piece of bone can track the moon. The shaman is weaving together, enhancing cognition, altered states of consciousness, and improving our capacity for making sense of the world, literally making more meaning.
Making sense of the world and literally making more meaning. Are those two the same? Making sense, understanding the world, finding coherence in the world, and then meaning being like the meaning of a sentence, words coming together in a way that fit together that mean something. I think that he was talking about last lecture, making sense, making more meaning, just commenting on two different senses of making sense and making meaning. Are they the same sense of the word? Here I am using a metaphor. Yay. But are they the same sense here, or is there slightly different?
Now, the shamans have a very interesting kind of experience. They go through this transformation They often experience what's called soul flight, as if they've gone to another world and they're flying through it.
Okay.
This is the origin. I mean, think of how we've come to this. But this is the origin of getting high.
I was just going to say, I mean, going to a different world, either based on, let's say, for example, the good sense, getting into philosophy and being struck in awe and wonder, falling in love with this wonder and all of these cascading insights about the true nature of reality and being taken up by that process and being high, a natural high. Maybe we can distinguish here a good sense of high, as long as we don't get to Icarus levels or what have you. And then the bad sense of high is escaping, not really ascending, but escaping in another fantasy world that gets you high in a sort of false flow state.
When the shaman does this, the shaman experiences themselves as if they're flying above the world.
Puer. Any puers? Some puer problems right there too.
So around 800 BCE to around 300 BCE, there's this great change such that you will read, connect to, find relevant authors, systems of thought, ways of being from that time period. And yet back here, where the Bronze Age ends, you don't read this stuff. In fact, or at least most of you don't. You don't find it relevant. You don't identify with it. Something happened here that is formative of us. Just like the Upper Paleolithic transition was formative of us as human beings, the Axial Age is formative of us as Western civilization.
Okay, this is the Axial Age. So bronze, not, or is it the Bronze Age? He's talking about 800 to whatever, 300 BCE.
Or at least world civilization. Because it's not just in the West that the Axial Revolution occurs. It also occurs in India and China. Now you need to grasp the gravity of this collapse. This is the greatest collapse in civilization the world has ever known. The fall of the Roman Empire is nowhere near as devastating as this. More cities go out of existence at this time, the Bronze Age collapse, than any other time in recorded history.
Wow.
More cultures disappear. Greatest loss of literacy, greatest collapse of trade and this is the closest thing the world has actually experienced to apocalypse.
Wow.
The end of the world.
Worth looking into.
What happens here,
I get it,
is a dark age. It's something like when the dinosaurs went extinct. When the dinosaurs went extinct, the little mammals that had been sort of scurrying about, they start to evolve. What you have once these dinosaur empires pass out of existence in the Dark Age is you have a lot of little small-scale societies, people barely hanging on.
Makes sense.
Very tough time. Another time in which there's a demand made on cognition to adapt.
Okay.
Remember the bottleneck in Africa preceding the Upper Paleolithic transition? Here's another bottleneck kind of event.
Quick question. I thought that our brains are pretty much identical to the very first Homo sapiens sapiens, or like when we split from Neanderthals, or I'm probably butchering all of this, but isn't the brain pretty much exactly the same? That could just be something I picked up that's totally wrong. So I'm wondering, when he's talking about shamanism and brain regions talking to one another, like, are we talking, if we did an autopsy of, people pre that to post shamanism, and now, this bottleneck of the Bronze Age collapse calling for another radical update in cognition? Are we talking brain chemistry? Are we talking CAT scans, MRIs showing changes? Or is the brain largely structurally, functionally staying the same? Or maybe, I don't know, I'm mixing up a bunch of things here, but maybe structurally, functionally, things change, but MRI wouldn't show those kinds of structural functional changes. I'm just curious about what the claim is here. It's a way of thinking. It's a collective way of thinking that's changing, using metaphors more often, and that's something you can track by looking at all the text that has been produced from this time to this time. Or, maybe we're probably, I don't know, when literacy shows up. Yeah, no, I mean, the Egyptians had hieroglyphs and everything, so we're talking like the use of metaphor in the recorded texts of a certain civilization ends up upticking around then, or are we talking like a certain brain region increases in size or something like that? Just wondering.
And they start to invent new psychotechnologies. Remember last time we talked about what a psychotechnology is. It's a standardized way of doing information processing that improves and enhances your cognition by linking brains together. Your brain to your own future states of your brain to other people's brains. Something happens here in one of the areas that was hit hardest by the Bronze Age collapse. What seems to be invented here is a new kind of literacy.
Okay.
Remember we talked about literacy as a powerful psychotechnology. Now the Bronze Age world had literacy.
Oh, sweet.
The Egyptians had hieroglyphics famously. The Sumerians had cuneiform.
Okay, that's almost word for word. Not that it's really some important point, but that is kind of funny. I watched this years ago now, so I really don't, and I only got halfway through this whole series. So that is funny. I was definitely aligned with sort of where he was going. I just have to point that out. That was kind of funny. Okay, so literacy was a thing. Egyptians had hieroglyphs. Okay.
Now the thing about those forms of literacy is they're very difficult to learn. You have to go to school for a very, very long time. And your job, you could have this job in the ancient world. This was your job, to be literate. It's called being a scribe.
Cool.
It's where we get words like scribble from. All you were, your entire job was you were literate, because it was a tough thing to be literate, and it was a very valuable thing, and it was a rare thing.
It is just connecting to the episode I made last week, Douglas Rushkoff's Program or Be Programmed. Right now, we have an entire thing. You are a programmer. That's your entire job. And in a way, that's today's version of a new form of literacy in the computer age, to know the alphabet and how to make sentences and make meaning and write stories. All of this is an analogy for writing code, zeros and ones, and then whatever kind of formal logic is on top of that. Boolean algebra or Boolean logic, whatever, stacks on top of that to make a sentence, to make a paragraph, to make and then you get a program, you get a websites would be the internet connecting these different programs together, but you've got, something running on your universal Turing machine. It's a program. So anyway, it's just funny, like, to be a programmer has that kind of scribe-esque feature to it, where today it's totally normal to just be like, oh yeah, I'm a programmer. That's all I do. Where maybe in the future we will all learn to program, as Rushkoff advocates in Program or Be Programmed. And then we'll look back and go, oh, that's so funny that there were people who were just called programmers, and that was an entire profession in and of itself, because it's a very hard thing to do. But today we kind of think of literacy as just sort of, oh, you learn that in school and it's not that hard, and being literate is sort of taken for granted. That's an interesting connection.
What gets invented here is alphabetic literacy. It seems to be invented in Canaan, and then it's taken up by the Phoenicians, and then they take it to the Greeks. And then the Canaanite alphabet merges imperceptibly into archaic Hebrew and then gets taken into Hebrew. That's going to be important. These two groups of people are going to be very important. Now, why is alphabetic literacy so powerful? It's much more learnable. It's a more effective and efficient psychotechnology.
Okay.
Remember when I said last time how much literacy enhances your cognition? If I give you alphabetic literacy, you can learn it much more powerfully and more people can learn it. So your ability to learn and access and share with others the benefits of literacy gets magnified tremendously.
And if I'm remembering correctly, it's sort of like the difference between Chinese literacy or like the Egyptian hieroglyphs, where it's almost like each idea being expressed is captured in a unique picture. And then that's how ideas are shared or communicated, is through these kind of almost like singular pictures of sorry, the cat. Where each picture depicts the idea trying to be shared or communicated. And an alphabet sort of breaks this down into like composite parts, and through the combination of these little alphabetic elements, then you can combine them in sort of almost an infinite way, and you can allow language to evolve infinitely. So it has this sort of infinite creative potential while being constrained or restrained to a 26-letter alphabet. So from this 26 comes the Cambrian explosion of all of communication that goes on, all of writing. Anyway, that could be it.
And so the amount of people, the number of people that can be literate expands. Now, literacy does something very, very important. Really, really interesting in its effect on your sense of self and your sense of cognition. As I noted before, when I can write things down, I can come back to my thoughts later and I can reflect on them.
Yeah, that's cool.
I start to become more aware of my own thoughts. And notice something else I can do. I can correct my thinking more readily, because I don't have to rely on it being held in my mind. I can put it, I can externalize it, I can put it out there, I can reflect on it, I can correct it. I can store it independent of my memory.
In a way, that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm recording this. It's the thinking through that happens up here sometimes when I'm listening to this stuff, doing the dishes. That'll be my go-to example while doing the dishes. But now if I record this, even if I'm the only one watching it, I can come back and reference my own understanding, my own engagement with this, struggling through, grappling with these ideas and everything, and then better correct my thinking or update the thinking, or, oh yeah, I mentioned that I was confused about this thing. Time to go back and, figure out what was going on there.
So I start to get a capacity for what Robert Bellah calls second order thinking.
Just wondering if this has anything to do with the higher order theory of consciousness. I think that's a thing.
Now, we all have metacognition. We'll talk about this later. Metacognition is your awareness of your own mind. I can ask you right now, what do you...
Metacognition. Sorry, that's funny.
You're thinking. You can become aware of it. Do you have a good memory? Yes or no? And you'll say, I do or I don't. That's metacognition. It's your knowledge and awareness of your own mind. We all have metacognition. But one of the things you can do with literacy, alphabetic literacy, is you can internalize literacy into your metacognition. So notice I'm becoming aware of my own cognition here. I can reflect on it, I can correct it, I can enhance it, I can store it, I can share it with others. Second order thinking is when you internalize a psychotechnology into your metacognition and it improves your capacity to critically examine your own thinking.
This is just reminding me, I really need to learn logic. I mean, I took a course in college. I didn't do the homework. I'm very interested in reading about logic, but, just your sort of standard first order logic, predicate logic, set theory, proofs, all that kind of stuff. Like, I really just need to sit down and do the work, because that also connects to programming and how computers run and the logic they're operating by. And I think it would allow me to do exactly this, what he's describing. I think it is an important thing and will just become more and more important going forward.
And correct your own thinking.
Especially at the rate of how quickly things are evolving with LLMs now and vibe coding and everything. And if the technology starts to get away from us and then we all never become literate in the actual programming of these things, I think that could be a dangerous asymmetry or disjunction between how quickly this stuff is taking off, and we need to be able to update our thinking and reflect on our thinking in more logical ways. I know John talks about propositional tyranny, and that's probably my focus on propositions, but if I'm lacking in having a handle on propositional thinking, then that's not good either. Because in order to critique it or in order to point that out, you have to go through the training, which he did, getting his PhD in philosophy, and which I keep on avoiding.
So in our next meeting together, we're going to talk more about this axial revolution and this sense that people had of their capacity for self-transcendence and their capacity for self-deception, and how that changed radically their sense of self and their sense of the world, and how that changed what meaning meant and what wisdom meant. Thank you for your time.
All right. So that's it for episode 2, Flow, Metaphor, and the Axial Revolution. This was a good one. I'm not going to do a whole wrap-up or anything like that. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, sending to someone else who you think might be interested in this sort of stuff. I would greatly appreciate it. Just getting started with really trying to post regularly, make these videos regularly. So we're going at a certain clip now, every Sunday. That's the target. That's what I'm going for. Thanks again. Have a good one, and see you next time.